Hello Smash fans and welcome back to this video. Today I want to talk about the double standard there are in sports and between the NFL and NBA in particular. Because over this off season of the NFL, I've seen a lot of NFL analysts kind of trashing players for expressing their opinion and expressing who they are and what they want done and the cryptic tweets and all of that. But over years past, especially in recent years, when NBA players are trying to force their way out of situations, doing so in not so pleasant ways, and doing so way more vocally, NBA analysts are all for it. And I just think it's a really interesting double standard. For example, a few years ago when James Harden wanted out of Houston, people didn't like the way he was doing it, sure, but people were behind his sentiment, could see why he was doing it, understood. And then even with Brooklyn, people necessarily didn't like the way James Harden was doing it, but they understood why he was doing it, understood that he could do it, and was 100% behind it. With the Kawhi decision in 2020, where he went from Toronto to LA, everyone was okay with it because that's just what basketball players do. In 2019, where he forced his way out of San Antonio, some people were for it and some people were against it, but people still sympathized with Kawhi Leonard. But in the NFL, you don't have that. There's no sympathy for Aaron Rodgers. There was barely any sympathy for Tom Brady. Like, people were like, okay, I understand this, but Tom Brady gave that organization 20 years of his career, and it was still hard for him to leave, and not everyone was behind him. There are very few cases in the NFL where you get player mobility being praised, but almost every instance over the past 5 to 10 years of NBA mobility, it has almost been unanimously praised. There are very few times in the NBA where you'll get a player who's getting criticized for leaving a team. The biggest example I can think of is Ben Simmons. But Ben Simmons wasn't even being criticized because he was trying to leave the 76ers. He was being criticized because of the way he was doing it. He could have still asked for a trade from the 76ers and played games, and people would have been fine with it. But imagine if, I don't know, Russell Wilson next year or Kyler Murray next year asks for a trade and holds out. You know the absolute shitstorm that would happen if that occurred. Every NFL, NBA analyst to ever exist would chime in. Every sports analyst in the world would say how selfish Kyler Murray is being, how unprofessional this is, how he needs to grow up. Yet if James Harden does it, it's fine. People may not like the antics, but they understand it. And I think that's really the interesting thing about this double standard, and it feeds into free agency, and it feeds into the ownership and overall player mobility. Because in the NBA, you get teams moving, the landscape is constantly changing, you always get new teams competing. For example, Phoenix Suns were in the finals, and 2 years ago, no one even thought they were going to be any good anytime soon. But the NFL, Jaguars have been bad for a millennium. Jets have been bad for a millennium. Giants have been good for at least 6 years. All of these teams are just not good. It's always the same teams at the top. It's very few movement. Like, you'll get some fluctuation over time, but it's not the NBA that's rapidly changing. And that's because player movement isn't incentivized, and player movement isn't incentivized because of the stigma around people asking for trades, people wanting out of situations, and also the contract situation, but that's another discussion. But it's all of this player mobility that makes the NBA such a more entertaining place to watch in the offseason. The NFL as a product, sure, especially during the regular season, the NFL as a product is much higher quality than the NBA as a product, just because less games, higher drama, closer games usually, more fun to watch for more people. In playoffs, depends on what you like between NBA and NFL. Depends on how you like to do it. I'm not going to go there. But in terms of an off-season product, and off-the-court drama, and off-the-field drama, NBA has the most hype off-season there is. Because A, it's shorter. B, there's always someone on the move. Always. Even a mid-level star. It's always on the move. There's always trade talks. There's always rumors. Player mobility. There's always a possibility of a big trade happening. Like this offseason. We'll be talking about LeBron. If they don't make a deep playoff run this year, which they probably won't, the Lakers and LeBron will be a topic of conversation. Whether or not they'll be trading LeBron this offseason will be a topic of conversation. Whether or not Dame will be traded will be a topic of conversation. Where James Harden will go will be a topic of conversation. In the draft, who's going to trade draft picks? Who's going to pick? That's always going to be a topic of conversation. But in the NFL, sure, you have the Aaron Rodgers drama over the past couple of years. That's helped. But outside of that, you don't really have that bit. There's not as much going on. You have a few potential trade options, but it's not as talked about as with in the NFL as it is with NBA players. And I think what people don't realize as a franchise in the NFL is that player mobility is good for any league, because the more players move, the easier it is to rebuild your team if you are competent. For example, the Miami Heat, right? They lost LeBron and were able to rebuild and become a championship team playoff team quickly. And then they lost more of their players, had to do another rebuild, but were fine. And by 2020, we're back in the finals. If an NFL team loses their star quarterback or loses multiple of their pieces, they'll be in ruin. For example, the Jaguars. They lost a few of their key pieces that led them to that AFC Championship game. They haven't even sniffed the playoffs since. The Dallas Cowboys are a really good example of a team that lucked out because they were able to draft a good quarterback. But teams that aren't able to draft a good quarterback, it hurts really badly for that franchise. The Giants haven't been able to get their quarterback position right. Haven't been able to surround their team, make their team better through free agency and through the draft. And they've been stuck in mediocrity for 7 years now. I'm trying to think. On the other hand, you only have I think it's probably about 3 NBA teams that are awful. Awful. And that's due to bad management. But every other NBA team, there's always that chance. Through free agency, through trades, every team has a chance to make the playoff, to make a championship run in a 10-year window. From start a rebuild to championship, every NFL team can make a championship NBA team can make a championship contender in a 10-year span. Not every NFL team can. They need more time than that. Most NBA teams can make a championship contender from scratch in 5 years. Look at the Nets. They blew up their entire team and started a rebuild in 2015. And by 2020, they had a championship contending team. Sure, it didn't pan out, but they got there. The 76ers were so awful. Like, terrible. Like, one of the worst teams to ever exist. And it took them 5 years. And they were a championship contender in 2019. Yeah, you can say what you want about the fit between Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, but they were one shot away potentially from winning an NBA title. And that is a fact. Because, yeah, you have to go through Milwaukee, but Giannis was not the player he is today in 2019. As well as everyone stayed healthy and everything stays the same course, yeah, 76ers could have easily won a title that year. And I think that's the difference between the NBA and the NFL, is the NFL prides itself on dynasty, and the NBA prides itself on player movement and player empowerment. And I think that's what made the NBA a more entertaining off-the-court topic of conversation than the NFL. And I think the NFL is the thing that's the one thing the NFL needs to take notes on from the NBA. Thank you so much, Smash fans, for listening to this video. If you like my content, feel free to check out other videos I've posted, and feel free to check out my blog at pdsmashsports.com, where I post weekly articles and also have my latest videos up. I hope you all are having a great day, and without further ado, PD Smash, signing off.